Dice are rolling, darkness falls. Inside the GM Studios halls. Tabletop games where nightmares creep. In a realm where sanity is lost and weak. Welcome to the abyss where dreams shatter. Inside the GM studio, nothing else matters. Blood and chaos, the dark arts unfold. In the realm of role-playing, where legends are told.
Hello out there in Electric Internet Land. Welcome to the side quest episode of Inside the GM Studio, or as I like to call it, Whiskey and Dice. I am your host, David.
I'm Matt.
We will field the question from the internet on the roll of a die as per usual since we started this format, I guess probably about a year ago, right? And I get a 9. 9. If your modifier is good, you probably can hit with that, but if you got a kind of a crummy modifier, you're not a striker, you're probably not hitting, but you know.
This one is going to come from Dragon Boom on our RPG with the title, Does the skill of the DM/GM or the mechanics of a system matter more for the quality of a session?
Ooh.
This is something I have wondered about ever since I started playing D&D. When I compare my experiences with D&D to those with Blades in the Dark, that was with a period, punctuation, grammar. Just get it right, Matt. When I compare my experiences with D&D to those with Blades in the Dark, it feels like D&D, the game, does nothing to enhance the game experience or help the GM run or plan the sessions. This is in stark comparison with Blades in the Dark, which naturally created tense situations with its stress mechanic, and has a lot of tools to help the GMs use the outcome of previous sessions to plan future sessions. But on the other hand, with my experience with Lancer, the GM absolutely butchered the sessions and made them into Snorefest, even though Lancer is supposedly a great system to play and run. So I'm confused. Is there an answer to this? If I can go first, David, I have a lot of thoughts already on this.
Go ahead.
First of all, simple answer is good DM can make any game system and mechanic fun, where a bad DM, even with a good system, will probably be kind of shit. I'm not the biggest fan of the Lancer system. You have to be very, very good in order to make that fun for a lot of people, unless you're just unless you're there to play a war game, board game. The role play sections of it is kind of boring, and you have to be a very good GM to run it. That's why I've never even attempted to run a Lancer game, because I don't feel like I could ever actually make it worthwhile. No. The mechanics, I don't think, have anything to do to make the session better or worse. The skill of the GM, yes. Like I said, bad GMs, it's going to be really tough. The game better be a very fun game in the way of mechanics for that session to go well, because I don't think story-wise, flavor-wise, it's going to be a lot of fun. It's probably going to be very straightforward. So that's the first thing I got to say on that. What about you, David?
I'm probably a little 1 foot in your camp and 1 foot out of your camp. So I agree that absolutely no great mechanic will save you from a bad GM.
Mm-hmm.
They will not do that. It doesn't matter how great the mechanics are. Conversely, a good GM can make up for a bad mechanic system.
Fuck yes.
They're probably fighting against the tide there. Some mechanic systems are just, frankly, I don't know that any really good GM is going to get me to really enjoy a game that is hyper crunchy.
Mm-hmm.
And I also don't know that a really good GM is going to ever make a game that doesn't really have a very solid mechanic system palatable if it's bad enough. Like I find ICRPG a little overly flattened.
Mm-hmm.
But I can enjoy that game if the game is run in an interesting way. But some of the games that have even more flattened systems than that, I don't find enjoyable, and I don't think it has to do with the GM. I think it has to do with the game itself. So I guess part of the reason that I might be inclined to disagree with the sentiment is it really depends on. Here I go again with a it really depends answer.
Hmm.
Um,
In
enjoyable
your
is
opinion.
yes, enjoyable is subjective.
Hmm.
So if what your players enjoy about a game is a robust mechanics system and what it offers the game, then that might matter more than the GM. If it's really mechanics heavy, it relies on everything. You have a whole group of engineers that just like everything to kind of be laid out in front of them. They don't like a lot of flexibility. They don't like a lot of narrative. They're not really into character development. They're not into character arcs. They're not into plot twists. They're not into foreshadowing or mood. Then that could be what your group finds really enjoyable. And in which case, you better gravitate toward a system that is really, really buttoned up. Uh, the problem with some mechanic systems is that if they're too rigid, then they hamstring GMs that want to be a little more creative. And in
Hmm.
which case, if you're talking about everybody in the game involved, the GM included, that's not going to make a very pleasurable game for the GM because he's going to feel railroaded by the mechanics. And conversely, if the mechanics are too overly simplistic or they're too open-ended, they're too flexible, they're too mushy, then a GM that maybe doesn't have, would like a little more guidance or structure in how to lay out encounters, on how to quantify certain results within the game. If it's all just kind of like, oh, well, the story's whatever you want to create, it's like I could see a GM that is like, well, look, I like a little structure and a little guidance mechanically for how to do this, and you're not really giving me that. And that phenomenon is probably part of the appeal. I mean, independent of the legwork of actually coming up with an adventure, a lot of people don't want to think about what the story of the adventure is. They don't want to think about who the characters in the adventure are. They don't want to think about the plots. They want to be free to tinker with things as they see fit, but they want all that laid out so they can just be a narrator, a rules adjudicator, a referee, and maybe do some funny voices or something.
Hmm.
So that is probably a large portion of the appeal. So that's probably not a super satisfying answer, but if I had to choose which is if I had to choose which is more important for everybody's enjoyment, it would be the I'm not even going to say quality because quality implies that there is some sort of objective measure like in a rule system, which there is not. Most of what we want when we play games is to have a nice time. And if you're in the company of people you like, that makes that much easier. But I do understand the position that I'm here to play a game, and playing the game is what I like.
Hmm.
And so I'm this way about something like, for instance, I just love to shoot pool. I love shooting pool. And I love to shoot pool with people that I like, and people that are around my skill level or a little bit better, maybe a little worse. And so I enjoy it most when I do those things at the same time. However, I will shoot pool with just about anybody. As long as they're not like an obnoxious shithead, I don't really need to be friends with them to enjoy the game of pool because I just enjoy the game of pool. I want to have someone to play with. And so if like given the opportunity to maybe hang out with someone that I think is cool or play pool with someone that I don't think is cool, sometimes I will choose playing pool with somebody that I don't think is cool, as long as it's not a zero-sum game. So that probably transfers to the mechanics and the GM, right? The person
Hmm.
involved in running the encounter, as it were, uh, and the actual rules that are on the table. So I don't know, do you have any thoughts on on that sentiment, or am I just being the mealy mouth guy that just says, yes, it just depends, kind of
No,
one or
no,
the
not at
other?
all. I actually think it goes well with this comment that I saw from Tigris Calidus,
Hmm.
where they state, I think the GM matters a lot more. However, it matters not only if it is a good GM, but also if the GM and you are compatible.
Yes.
I really like that. That's a really good comment,
Right.
uh, because that's the other part of it is if you and the GM or the GM and the rest of the table don't mesh, yeah, it's going to be it's the same thing with players too. I think if some players don't mesh real well, it can turn out to be bad for both of them usually.
It's because the first rule of business when you're establishing a game is establishing kind of the, I guess, for lack of a better word, Robert's rules, right? If you know what this is, it's a general sense of decorum on how you run public meetings.
Mm,
And that's kind of what you do when you get players in your group. You go, okay, here's the kind of world that I'm interested in running, kind of game I'm interested in running, either in tone, tenor, table decorum, whatever. And then you need to make sure that your players are all on the same page, like that they accept those rules of engagement, so to speak.
mm,
And if they full stop just don't like the way that you do it, then if they don't mind some, they're like, well, I like a little more like this, and there might be some flexibility on your part to be like, okay, well, we can run that game. I was maybe more interested in some sort of like high fantasy, but like if you're more like in the heroic fantasy, then maybe we can gravitate a little more toward that. And
mhm.
but if it's just like, look, I'm a GM that expects your character to always speak in character. I like in character dialogue, and the player's just like, well, I really, really don't like that. I really don't. And that's not to say that one is right or one is wrong. It's just like that's what you both enjoy. So when it comes to the mechanics, sometimes players like, look, I like to be more immersed in the story and thinking about what my character's motivations and stuff are than getting bogged down on like how I perform a specific skill check or something. So I
Mhm.
don't mind the GM just kind of telling me when a skill check is called for or what sort of skill check I should be doing. Like when it arises, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to think about how to min-max everything. I want to move through the plot, and I want the mechanics to just be there to kind of bolster the fun. And then, if your GM is on the other end of the spectrum where he's, very stringent about like these are the mechanics and you need to know the mechanics and everything, that's a mishmash. Or some players like a lot of clarity around how the rules work so that they can know what it is that they're doing in the game and
Mhm.
act with some sort of purpose. And if you have a GM that's just like, well, I don't know, I mean, like, what are you trying to do? And we'll just kind of like, it's really mushy and kind of like, because the mechanics don't really lay that out, and your GM is just fine with just kind of doing a ad hoc ruling every time something comes up. Like if you want to do X, it might be one way under one circumstance, and it might be another way under another circumstance, depending on what the plot calls for, depending on what the GM's sensibilities are. Players that don't want to get bogged down in the mechanics are likely to like that. They just go like, okay, I just need to do that this time. But players that are a little more like rigid and thoughtful about liking the mechanics of a game are likely to be like, wait a minute, why is it like last time I did something very similar? It was a completely different role, and like, why are you calling for this role this time? And if the GM just says, well, it just seems more appropriate, and it's like, well, but I want to know. I want to know what the rules are. And so those things are all ironed out by how rigorous the mechanics are. Um, so part of that selection, presumably a GM selects a mechanics set for a game that suits his players' sensibilities and suits the sort of game that he's willing to undertake the responsibilities of, or she.
Mhm.
If you're not prepared to undertake the responsibilities of a certain game mechanic, you go, okay, we're going to play, I don't know what's the really Shadowrun, right? It's a really
Mhm.
crunchy rules mechanic. And everybody buys into that. And then when you run it, you're not really all that thoughtful about ensuring that the mechanics element is being adhered to.
Right.
Your players will likely be frustrated because you've sold them on an idea that you're going to play Shadowrun, which has certain mechanical expectations, and then you're not upholding them because you've taken on more, you've bitten off more than you can chew, and you've taken on
Mm-hmm.
more responsibility for a mechanic set. Or if you're going to want everything to be very dialed in and very specific and try to like cobble together a rules set from one that doesn't really have it that much, then that might squash the flexibility, freedom, creativity, and nimbleness of a more rules light system, and in which case your players might feel taken for a ride. So it really, we get a lot of questions that act as though there's one, first of all, acts as though there's two camps between two things. And that's usually a false dichotomy. You're either with us or you're against us. It's a black and white fallacy, presenting two options as if they're the only two options. And two, to act as though one is objectively better than the other. But you have to remember that a game is predicated on the players and let's just say the agents in the game, the GM and the players included. I would be very skeptical that a mechanic system could just make a game enjoyable when the GM is not that competent, especially because depending on what you enjoy about the game, if the GM isn't part of being a competent GM is being able to run a variety of different rule systems
Mm-hmm.
and understand what those rule systems limitations are and what their benefits are and leaning into and away from the things that are leaning into the things that are good and leaning away from the things that are bad. And so that just kind of starts there. You could have the best mechanics system in the world, but it might suit your sensibilities perfectly. But if your GM is, I'm not going to say inept, but let's just say not experienced enough to run the mechanics to its full potential, then you're just missing a lot of the fun that is embedded in those mechanics, and they're not going to save you because the mechanics don't run the game. The GM runs the game. So,
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna give uh, two scenarios that I was in where this kind of really works well with my past experiences. So I tried playing Fate. Geez, this was probably about six 6 to 8 years ago, somewhere around there. Fate is a very narrative driven. It uses dice that are called fudge dice. It's just four six-sided dice. Two sides have minus symbols, two sides have plus symbols, and then two sides are just blank. You have numbers for your attributes as well as a bunch of narrative shit that you can use as later on in the mechanics. You roll the four fudge dice. Say you're doing like a strength roll, you roll the four fudge dice. Your strength is 2. You get a plus sign, a negative sign, a plus sign, and a blank. You get a +1, so you roll the 3.
yeah.
Simple, very simple narrative style where you can take a something about your, say, your origin, and you can use that as a mechanic for a reroll or for to make the GM reroll, or for a function that it comes up in the scenario. The guy that ran it for me was utter horseshit, and from then on I was just like, Fate fucking sucks. It is not for me. I don't like it, and that was kind of like the start of my uh, decline into narrative style games.
Hmm.
But then my friend Sabina, who used to play in my Wednesday game, uh, they had a actual play, Two Monsters Rolling Dice podcast that I would listen to all the time, and they played Fate, and their GM was so goddamn good. I wanted to play Fate. I wanted to play in this game with this system because he made it sound so fun. The way that he would use the mechanics and how they would play together. I was like, this sounds like a fucking great time. And I would actually thought about looking, going back and saying, all right, Evil Hat, maybe you had something. Maybe I'll look at Fate one more time. Uh, and then the second one is how the actual questioner here brought up Blades in the Dark. My buddy Dan, who is in my Thursday group, he wanted to run Blades in the Dark, and he asked us all if we wanted to play. This was about 2 years ago, and I said, "Go fuck yourself," because it's based on Powered by the Apocalypse. And I was like,
Good friend of yours then.
I do not like PBTA. I was like, I don't do PBTA. And he's just like, dude, it's different. You know, they added some stuff. I was like, fuck it, it's PBTA. I don't know if I'm gonna like it. And then he started talking about it. I was like, oh, the world sounds cool. Oh, that mechanic sounds kind of cool. And then he started talking about the flashback mechanic. I was like, I don't know, man, that sounds pretty fucking bad. And Dan is a really good horror GM. He really succeeds when it comes to horror and thriller style games. So he made this very awesome, like otherworldly horror mystery game for us, set in Blades in the Dark. And god damn it, if he didn't sell me on that game, I went and bought the book the next day. Like, I have the physical copy over there because I was like, this game fucking rules. And it was because Dan made it that way. But it is the only Powered by the Apocalypse backbone game that I will say is a really, really good game system. Because it's fucking fantastic. Dan sold me on it because of the way that he ran it. And he was so fucking good that I actually went and bought the book the next day.
It probably speaks to an understanding of kind of what the game should be and how the game should be run, with a particular mechanics set, right? And so, probably a better analogy that I probably should have come up with earlier is that mechanics are like clothes, right? And you don't need to have particularly fancy clothes, but if they fit you really well, they look good on you. They don't need to be super fancy or whatever. However, the fanciest suit, if it's not properly tailored to you, will look like shit. It will look like shit. Like, you're better off getting a cheap suit that's tailored than an expensive suit that doesn't, because that's how I look at mechanics, is that they need to suit the person that is running them. They need to suit their sensibilities. They need to like those mechanics. And so it's just they need to be in alignment, like you said, to mesh, for lack of a better word. And it doesn't mean that you're always going to enjoy every game, that a good GM running a mechanics set that you hate, running it perfectly great, doesn't mean it will suit your sensibilities. But a GM running a mechanics set that's good, if it doesn't suit them, again, maybe they're not even inept. Like, I don't do well with particularly crunchy rule sets. D&D is kind of the sweet spot for me. I understand it. I've been playing it a long time. I can run it fairly well. Like, when it comes to rulings, I like to think that I'm fair at adjudicating the rules, and I streamline things, and I try not to get bogged down in too many mechanics, but there's not too many mechanics to get bogged down in. But my sensibilities and my GM style, I'm probably like your buddy. I'm probably better at running horror themed games.
You are. When we used to play VTM, Vampire the Masquerade, more years ago, you were very, very good at it.
Yeah, it just suits my sensibilities more. I'm more interested in kind of protracted dialogue scenes where things get revealed. I'm more interested in kind of setting mood and setting up horrific drama that's kind of like psychologically whatever. But my players like to play D&D, and so that's what I play, and I've developed somewhat of an aptitude for it over the years. But like, I tried running the Conan the RPG, and I love the Conan world and I love the Conan feel, but I couldn't get into it, and as a result, it bogged the game down. It made the game unenjoyable, even though that mechanic system is clearly for somebody. And if you understand it and can run it well, then that's, I don't think that was like an inaptitude on my part. It was just a lack of interest in kind of leaning into what those rules are supposed to be about.
Yeah. Yeah, if you were never there for third edition, this is the Conan, the role-playing game, the D20 version that uses the Pathfinder First Edition or Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 edition rules. It is a very crunchy system, and for people, especially like David and I, who had been playing D&D for a long time, and we had Patrick with us that was playing, that only played 5th edition as far as I know. There was a lot of rules in there that they were just kind of like, or that Patrick was like, what the fuck? And like oh God, what is it? It's the critical confirmation roll.
Yeah.
So in back in the D20 days of 3.5 edition, third edition, Pathfinder, when you rolled a critical, a natural 20, you had to roll again. And if it hit, then sure, it was a critical hit. But if you failed, it was just a regular hit. And I remember I brought that up to David one day, and you were like, that's fucking dumb. And even
Yeah.
Patrick was just like, I just rolled a natural 20. What do you mean it's not a critical? It's got to be confirmed. And it's like, what do you mean
Yeah.
confirmed?
It's a yeah. It's a natural 20 on a d20 is always a hit,
Mm,
but it's only a critical if you hit with the follow-up attack
yeah.
too, and that just bogged the game down.
Hmm.
It made criticals more significant, and they were far more devastating in that game.
Yeah, very much so.
And so that's cool, and if that's the sort of dynamic in a game that you want, but it's always just a tug of war. If you like, more edge cases or more like something like criticals being more unique,
Mm,
that just pulls at the economy of the round. And if you go too far in the other direction, you might have super quick economy in a real rules light system like ICRPG or something. It might go very fast, but you might find it lacking in sophistication in what you can do. It's like,
hmm.
yeah, well, because the more sophisticated you get, the more layers there are. If you're just running up and doing a basic attack, determining whether it hits and rolling damage on it, or like in the Fabula Ultima, you don't even roll damage, right? You just
Yeah.
go boop, and I just did that much damage. My turn
Mm,
is over. Shit'll go really quickly, and if that's
hmm.
the sort of game that you're interested in, then that's great because I guess I just resist the notion that there is such a thing as a good mechanic and that there is such a thing as a good. I mean, there are such things as good DMs and bad DMs or whatever, but I'm just saying that those things probably ought to match. Like every mechanic is for someone. So if that someone is you as a GM and it's you your players, then it can work fine. But if they're mismatched, and some mechanics are just, not great,
Hmm.
but that's just a subjective assessment where they have to be for someone or they wouldn't be in the market. And
Right.
so you got to just ask yourself the question, am I the someone that this is for? And am I prepared to do that? And is it something my players are going to like? Because we all get different levels of enjoyment out of different aspects of the game, and good GMs, empirically, full stop, good GMs. There's no alternative to this at all. It's just totally, there's just only the good GMs, but thoughtful GMs, let's say, adjust their games accordingly, right? Like
Hmm.
if players in your game don't like a certain aspect, that tamping it down isn't gonna ruin your enjoyment of the game. My players don't like, role playing encounters, and so is tamping down role playing encounters going to ruin your enjoyment? Then you're mismatched. But if eliminating them, your players don't want any role playing encounters and you want all role playing encounters, somebody's not getting what they want. And so that's just not going to be a fun time for anyone, no matter how you cut it.
There's one more comment that I want to read over from sorry underscore ad underscore 5111. Uh, they say some games are better at specific style of games and can be more or less forgiving if you modify the rules. People hate to hear this, but D&D is a kitchen sink system for running almost any type of game, and the rules are largely a suggestion. It takes a skilled DM to fill in the gaps, and uh, the rules don't cover. Cut or change rules that aren't working, homebrew systems to do all the extra things players ask, and rework the story when the players derail it. Lancer and Blades in the Dark are focused on being one kind of game you make one kind of character for, so the rules will support that better. You are a mech pilot in Lancer going to war. You are a group of thieves planning heists respectively in Blades in the Dark. In D&D, you can go dungeon diving, explore wilderness, solve a murder mystery, roleplay factional political intrigue, command an army, battle across dimensions in space boats, and achieve ascension into godhood all in one campaign. And I'm not joking. Maybe those are all entirely different kinds of games, and D&D isn't the best at any of them, but a good DM can make it fun. It's a damn
Yeah,
good comment.
because D&D can be almost anything
Yeah.
within a certain spectrum.
Hmm.
And, you know, you get too far in the direction of generic, then you get like Savage Worlds, which is just like almost too generic.
Yep.
And I believe the biggest criticism of D&D is one that holds up, which is it tends to be rulings over rules. And but the more you dial in a rules set, the more what you are doing is saying we are playing a specific type of game, and there is certain things that fall outside the boundaries of that game. And but D&D in particular is pretty good about, like he said, having kitchen sink, or I would say a la carte. Um, you and I don't care for Spelljammer, and I don't. Who are these people that play with firearms in Dungeons and Dragons? This is a weird thing to me. I don't like it. I don't want it in my games. It'll never be in my games. And so, but it's not, it's an optional rule, right?
Hmm.
There's lots of optional rules, but that does make it feel a little wishy-washy and non-committal about some things. And so but there is a reason that it has become the most popular role-playing game. It's because it balances pretty nicely that flexibility with some concrete things that are in the rules that make it appealing to a wide audience. But like I said, always going to nice. There's always going to be a system that is like for somebody, but it just depends on whether you're that somebody. Is this like Big B's
Yeah.
hand flipping you off?
Big B's middle finger.
Big B's middle finger. I
For
love
those
it.
listening, if you don't watch our Twitch stream, I just shared somebody made a very fun miniature to play at your game table that looks like a Big Beast hand, or maybe even a what's that wizard cantrip?
Mage hand?
Mage hand, or maybe even a mage hand, if you can see mage hand, but with just a middle finger sticking up.
It's pretty big to be a mage hand. Mage hands
Yeah.
are like the size of a normal hand,
Yeah.
but it could be a spiritual weapon under the right circumstances.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, I think that's going to bring us to the end of this episode. Unless you got anything else you want to add there, David.
Yeah, I felt like I said what I had to say.
I agree. So I think we'll just leave that with a good night.
And good luck.
Fuck yeah.